Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melissa Lieberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. And today we're going to talk about consulting pricing mistakes. I want to help you avoid these 7 consulting pricing mistakes. Pricing is on my mind. We haven't talked about it in a while on this podcast. It's definitely something I think all of us are thinking about just in terms of pricing and thinking about what our business looks like and where we can be adjusting our pricing to reflect the value that we're delivering. It's always such a good topic to revisit as a business owner. And then also it's on my mind because I will be hosting a webinar later today. This podcast goes live on October 27th. So when it goes live, it will be October 27th, and the webinar for MBO partners is later on the 27th. It happens to be 1:00 Eastern time. So if you happen to be listening to this in the real time, we'll put the link in the show notes to go register for that webinar. And I believe if you register after the webinar, you'll still get the replay. So if you don't happen to be listening to it in the real time, go check out that link anyway. So we'll be talking in that webinar about how to raise your rates today to win business tomorrow is the topic. So I always love doing webinars with them. So it'll be a good one. Very interactive with their team as well. So with that, let's dive in today to the 7 consulting pricing mistakes we want you to avoid. That's what we're going to focus on. I'm going to walk you through those 7 specific mistakes and help you understand what each of them is through some examples so that you really can identify whether or not you're making the mistake. Now, listen, there's nothing wrong with making a mistake. This is not a problem. It's only a problem if you avoid it after you realize you're making the mistake. So no judgment going on here. It's just a set time for your business at this moment as you're listening to figure out what might not be going the way you want it to and identify the areas that you want to adjust. All right. So I always like to remind you, don't use anything that I share with you against yourself. We're here and evolving and constantly in growth mode, working on our businesses and always improving. And that's the intention. All right. First, before I dive into those 7 mistakes, I want to point out 2 resources for you that will be really valuable complements to the work that we're talking through today. The first is a rate and pricing mega tutorial. That's a sexy word for, a 15 or 16 page blog all about rates and pricing and pretty much everything you ever wanted to know in a Cliff Notes version. We probably all have books on our shelves that are about pricing that are, volumes. This is the Cliff Notes version of exactly what you need to know as an independent consultant about rates and pricing. So we'll put the link in the show notes so that you can go find that. The simple way that I'll tell you here verbally is to go to my website, melissalieberman.com. You can find a resources tab and then find the blog. And then if you scroll down a little bit, through the show notes, you'll find the rates and retainer fee blog, the mega tutorial. So go check that out because it's got so much in depth there that I have consolidated for you. So you've got one place to go for anything you want to know about rates. Then the other thing that I will encourage you to go take is a new assessment that I've created. It's the Independent Consulting Pricing Assessment. I love creating these assessments for you. I've created assessments on scaling, your readiness for scaling, your readiness for the recession, your productivity, and now this newest one is on pricing. So go get that assessment. It's at IC, the letters IC, as in independent consultant, icpricing.com. So that is a new assessment. You'll answer a handful of questions, and then it's going to give you a really detailed report on where your areas of opportunity are from a pricing perspective. And it also gives you resources that you can lean on to start addressing those areas of opportunity. All right. So that is 2 resources that I want to share with you so that you, of course, put this work that we're talking about on this podcast into action for you and your business. So with that, let's dive straight into each of the 7 mistakes, what it is and what it looks like. So the first mistake is underestimating what you do. So when you're pricing out or offering and going through the sales process, it's so common for independent consultants to underestimate the value of what you do. A lot of times this work comes naturally to you. You might have been born with the ability to define a process. I might have been, I don't know. It's kind of weird, right? We just gravitate towards certain things. Certain things come more easily to us than other things. And so because they come easily to us, it's so common for us to underestimate the value of them. We kind of assume that everyone can do this thing that we're really good at. It's so common to even just completely overlook that it's what you're doing is even something that's valuable. And so when you get to the place where you're underestimating and making this mistake in your pricing, you're not taking into account all of the value that you're contributing to that engagement and to that client. And so when you're not taking all of that into account because you're overlooking it, you're underestimating it, then you miss that value. You miss those benefits. You miss the impact. And you don't incorporate that into your pricing strategy as a result. So take a step back and just think about, where are you underestimating things that just come naturally to you that are truly a benefit and a value to your clients, and start incorporating those into your sales process and ultimately into your pricing. I had a client I was working with, and he is a Six Sigma expert, a Lean Six Sigma expert, works with manufacturing clients and goes into, these manufacturing environments and helps them to streamline their processes. And this truly comes so naturally to him, both because of the nature of his personality and what he loves and is passionate about, and the corporate experience that he had accumulated over all these years. And so as we were coaching together, almost every single time we had a call, we were identifying something new that he was just completely overlooking, that he was providing to this client that just came naturally. He didn't have to think about it. It just rolled out off his tongue. It was very instinctual and incredibly valuable to this client to avoid them, shutting down their entire manufacturing line. And so as you're able to really dialogue with someone else and have that other point of view to say, look, you're telling me this, and this is incredibly valuable, and you aren't recognizing it. So that can be really an important part of this process, is you figuring out what you're overlooking, but also it's so hard to see the forest through the trees, right? So having someone else who can help you identify that is a really important and effective strategy in terms of overcoming that first mistake. The second mistake is undercutting yourself. So what I mean by this is how you think of yourself matters. When you think of yourself as, I am a vendor to this client, I am a subordinate in some way. I'm talking to the CMO, for example, or the COO or the CEO, and I feel subordinate to them. Or perhaps you think of yourself as, I'm just a one-person shop here. When you think of yourself in that way, you end up pricing yourself in that way. You end up pricing yourself as a commodity. You end up pricing yourself as someone who's less experienced than what you are. You end up pricing yourself as someone who isn't delivering the level of value and outcomes that you truly are. This is something I also catch with my clients so often. They don't even realize it, and you're probably not realizing it either. You just might say in passing that might even sound kind of funny, right? Being self-deprecating. I love being self-deprecating. But at the same time, when you're being self-deprecating to yourself and seeing yourself and letting that impact your pricing, you've got a problem as a business owner. And so noticing those things, those sentences in your brain, or that inner critic who's telling you you're just a vendor or you're just a one-person shop. Who are you to be charging as much as, Mackenzie, or whatever is going on in your brain? You have to realize that that talk track is not sending you in the direction as a business owner that you want to be headed in. So the shift here is noticing that with vigilance. Having someone point it out to you can be very valuable again in this situation, but you've got to also learn to notice it for yourself and then start rebuilding and cultivating that new way of looking at yourself, of seeing yourself as a peer. You're a peer to the CEO. You're a peer to the CMO. You're an expert. You're a trusted advisor. When you're seeing yourself that way, as you're going about your day-to-day, or as you're going about a sales meeting, or as you're purposefully seeing yourself as you're writing a proposal, it can be the difference between, honestly, I see these proposals from my clients, and that alone can be the difference of even just 10%. 10% makes a big difference. And so think about the way you're thinking about yourself and don't make that mistake of undercutting yourself. Okay, number 3 is making the pricing about you. There is a common misconception in the industry that you are your business. And we all kind of use this flippantly in a way. It's like, charge what you're worth. This is not what we're doing. We are not charging what you're worth. What we're charging and what you're pricing out is the value that the client is receiving. Let me restate this because it's so important. The client is not buying your time. The client is not even buying access to you. The client is not buying your services. The client is buying an outcome they wish to achieve and are willing to pay for. That's what they're buying. It's not you. It's you delivering that outcome. And so decoupling, the solution here is decoupling you from what you're delivering. And I know it gets so intertwined. I understand that. I find myself in the same position that we're talking about, but you've got to be able to recognize when you're doing that and unravel it so that you're pricing things from the perspective of what the value is to that client, what the benefits are to that client, why they care about it, what that outcome is worth to them. And not thinking about the pricing as how much is my time worth. Most of the time we calculate some worthiness or a number for our time based on the set point of what we were making in corporate, right? Or what we would be making had we stayed in corporate. It's kind of like, okay, I would be making around this amount of money. And if I kind of like back into the number, it's roughly $500 an hour, or $300 an hour, $2,000 a day, whatever the number is for you. That's not what we're doing here. And that's what so many of us do. But the pricing is not about you and what you would be making in corporate. The calculation is about your worthiness. That's a whole separate topic. You're a human. That's a completely different topic. It's not about what you're worth. It's truly about what the value is to the client and you focusing on that and making this process about them, the sales process and the pricing process about them. It's going to help you get out of your own head and put your personal hangups aside and be able to think about it from the client's perspective. Okay, you're getting me worked up here today. This topic is, okay, number 4, undercharging. So the number 4 mistake that I see consultants making so often from a pricing perspective is undercharging. I have already done 3 episodes about this. You can go listen to them in much, much, much more detail. But I want to remind you of this. Those episodes are 50, 51, 52. We'll put those in the show notes to remind you at a very high level what this means, undercharging. It's a very, very common that consultants don't want to rock the boat. If you're charging on an hourly or daily basis, you don't want to increase your prices or by very much. You might not even have a process for yourself to adjust pricing periodically. It's more of like when I feel like it, or I feel kind of resentful. I see a lot of consultants come to me and say, I ask them what their process is for adjusting their pricing model, like the baseline against which they're setting their prices, whether those are hourly or daily or value-based, thinking about the way that they look at the model. And the answer is always like, oh, well, in the past, I've done that basically when I just start feeling really resentful and I realize it's beyond time that I should have done this kind of thing. So think about it for you. When is the last time you adjusted your pricing? Do you have a set process for adjusting your pricing model? Are you considering the value, tangible, intangible, emotional, of the work that you're doing with your clients as you're building out the pricing model? If you have more demand than you can handle, and sometimes that's cyclical, but if you have more demand than you can handle, that's also an opportunity to raise your pricing. One of the keys here is to notice the emotion from which you are pricing. When your emotion is based on fear or lack of confidence, and you're working on a proposal from that headspace, I should say that emotional space, you're going to discount what you're doing. Versus when you're able to get into the emotional state of confidence and clarity and feeling abundance versus scarcity. When you're able to get into that, notice the emotional state that's most likely driving the undercharging, which is fear or lack of confidence, and then shifting that into a confident emotional state. I'm touching on this at a high level here. This is the type of work that I also do with my clients, is really helping them to see where their emotional state is something that they can impact without anything else needing to change, any of the circumstances to change in order for them to get the outcome that they're looking for. It's a formula that you can use to do this. So for you, you want to start working on that. Start noticing from an emotional perspective, where are you when you're writing these proposals or going through sales processes with your clients? Are you working from a lack of confidence and fear as you're doing that work? Because you're going to give yourself that discount, or you're going to discount the pricing. So what the result of that is, almost every single time in some way, whether it's discounting the amount you're charging or the number of hours you're estimating against it, or whatever your process is, or both, versus getting yourself purposefully into that confident, abundant state in order to charge for the value that you're delivering for that client. So that's the mistake number 4, undercharging. And again, you can go listen to those other 3 podcasts as well after this, if that's something that you're struggling with, like so many consultants are. Okay, the next one, number 5. This is misassessing or misunderstanding risk in your business. It is common for you and almost every consultant that I talk to assume that non-time-based consulting strategies are riskier. Right? So we assume that if we just base things off of time, it's the least risky, because no matter what the client asks us to do, we're covered, right? Scope creep as big of a deal, or we don't have to put as much in the upfront process because scoping it out doesn't matter so much, or understanding the clients, what they're wanting to achieve doesn't have to go so deep. So it feels less risky. And so a lot of times we'll find that independent consultants will stick to time-based strategies in order to feel safer. And those time-based strategies might be charged by the hour, charged by the day, or they might even be you building up a project based on the estimated number of hours to get to some more of a form of a fixed fee type of an engagement. So whatever type of engagement that you're doing, when you're thinking that this is less risky, then this is something that you want to look at, because you could very well be misassessing and misunderstanding the risks. And here are the risks that you need to consider when you're thinking about your pricing strategy that are often overlooked. And these need to be taken into account. When you are associating your pricing strategies around the time you're going to be spending on that client, there's such a greater chance of you getting burned out, because you're working to deliver for these clients and you're running your business and you're, quite frankly, incentivized to work more hours than less to generate revenue. So of course, you're going to have a much higher chance of being burned out. You're also, in a lot of ways, the risk that is very often not seen is that you end up having less influence with the client because they see you as more junior than you are, especially if you're charging more on an hourly basis or even a daily basis. That client may be seeing you as an extra pair of hands, as a contractor, versus as the consultant that you are, and then you being able to price accordingly, according to your expertise. These are like hidden risks, right? The other risk of time-based strategies is that the client's incentivized to hold back work from you, in the sense of, am I going to want to pay her or him to do this work or not? Maybe I'll just give this to this internal person, or we'll just try to figure this thing out on our own. They'll give us the strategy and we'll kind of take it from there. So then you're not able to be as embedded or as much of a trusted advisor to them, because they're constantly wondering, should I engage this person or not? So these are some things that are important to take into account as you're pricing out your work, and not just going with that kind of automatic assumption that time-based strategies are safer, and really looking at this picture more holistically. So when we look at it more holistically, at the end of the day, all the fee structures have both risk and reward, right? And so it's your job as a consulting business owner to really identify and mitigate the risks of whatever pricing strategy you choose. And you're choosing the pricing strategy based on what's most lucrative to your business, and also aligned with what will help the client achieve their desired outcome. So that was number 5. Number 6, delaying the involvement or avoiding the involvement, in some cases, of your potential client in pricing discussions. So this is about the sales process. This happens so often. I'll start working with a client and they'll tell me about, hey, can you look at this proposal I'm about to send over to a prospective client? I say, sure, no problem. I ask them for some context. So tell me a little bit about this. Tell me what you've done so far with this client to understand and get to the point of a proposal. Tell me what the client's budget is. Tell me all the things. And then they're like, I don't know, especially about the budget. I don't know what the client has in mind from a pricing perspective. I haven't set any expectations or kind of seeding discussions about pricing. This is the first time we're pulling back the curtain. So that's not what you want to be doing in terms of getting their buy-in, getting their inputs, getting a good understanding and alignment from a proposal perspective. You want to be in a position where you're co-developing with this client, and the proposal is a formality. So it is so common for this to happen. I see it over and over and over again. But if you can get to the place where you are embedding the questions about value, about what the client is, do they have a budget, about what they're thinking from a pricing perspective. Nothing is boxing you in, but what is the internal approval process? What are the thresholds for getting additional approvals involved? Just really understanding about how you can be a partner with the client who is buying your services and helping them navigate internally versus surprising them with the pricing at the end and crossing your fingers that they don't have sticker shock. So you want to start folding in and defining your sales process in a way that creates this buy-in and this feeling of, I've helped contribute to the pricing by asking the questions related to value and what the client's tangible, quantifiable outcomes are and the intangible, qualitative outcomes are, and how the client thinks about the value of each of those, so that you're then setting a stage for, for example, it might be that at the end of the day, the value of the work that you're doing is in the millions for your clients, potentially multiple millions over the course of several years. And just based on even 3 or 4 months that you've worked with them, that lifetime value. And then when they're thinking about it from that perspective, that you're helping them to get to the place that's contributing, millions or multiple millions of dollars to their business, then when you're coming at them and talking about the pricing of your proposals and it's in the 6-figure range, it feels so much less, right? It feels like, oh, that's like 10% of whatever it is that the value would be, as an example. So you're creating that perspective. Consultants don't do this because it's uncomfortable. We're taught in society not to talk about money. We don't like talking about money. So we delay it and avoid it. And then we get ourselves into these problems. So I want to help you avoid that problem. Okay. And then the last one is number 7. And I've touched on this in different ways, but it's so important. Not understanding and or not selling the value, incorporating the value of what you're doing into your pricing. Why is the client undertaking this engagement? What is the impact of doing the work? What is the impact of not doing the work? How does it impact the stakeholders personally and professionally? What's the emotional toll that you would lift off of them? Why do they care about solving this problem? There's a million problems they could be solving. Why this one? And what's the ultimate ROI? So if you're not understanding that value to them, it's going to be really hard to develop a pricing set of proposals for that client in a way that really reflects what you're ultimately going to do for them. If you do that work up front, where you're really understanding that value and articulating it, as I was describing even in that last example, you'll set yourself up to price your services at a level that's so much more in line with what the outcomes that they're experiencing through working with you versus just thinking about it as you as a commodity, them as, buying your time. So it's so important. And I've touched on this in several different ways throughout these 7 mistakes. But if I were to give you any one takeaway, it's really you getting to the place where you're taking yourself out of the equation and thinking about this client and what the value is and getting deeper in your sales process to understand those value drivers so that you can price your work accordingly. And one other thing I'll tell you just around this topic is so important. Next week, stay tuned, because next week we're going to dive more into selling the value and talk specifically about overcoming the fear around value-based pricing. So don't miss that episode next week either. So let's just recap here. Let's recap and send you off to go work on your pricing. So the 7 mistakes that I see so common with independent consultants. And if you would love help with this, reach out to me. I would love to talk with you and see if it would be a good fit to bring you into coaching in order to help you one-on-one to recognize where these problems are happening in your business. As I've described to you throughout these examples today, so often it's hard for us to see the challenges in our own business because we're in our own heads. This is why I personally have my own coach to help me see where I'm in my own head, and a lot of times making the same mistakes over and over, but just in like different ways. My brain gets smarter and craftier about getting around some of the things that I've been trying to make it stop doing. And so it gets more sneaky. So those are the kinds of things that we work on from a coaching perspective. So if that's something you feel would benefit you and you want to explore, go out to my calendar and book a call at consultmelissa.com, and we can talk about you specifically. But in the meantime, let me just recap these 7 mistakes that I see so commonly with consultants making with their pricing. The first is underestimating what you do. The second is undercutting yourself. The third was making the pricing about you. The fourth was you undercharging. The fifth was misassessing and misunderstanding risk in your business. The sixth was delaying involvement of your potential clients in pricing and money-related topics. And the seventh is not understanding or selling the value of what you do. So hopefully this is helpful. I am looking forward to you going and putting this into place in your business and you making more money. And I will see you again next week, where we'll talk about the value-based pricing fear and how to overcome it. All right. See you there.
Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melissalieberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.